Hello, everybody. Actually, I guess I shouldn't say welcome back because we're moving right along. For our YouTube viewers, welcome back to the Upside Swings NBA Draft Podcast or the NBA Draft Show. Maybe we should just start calling it the NBA Draft Show. We should probably. I'm like trying to think through all our I'm beautiful minding right now, Coop. This is all right. Write all this down for me. But no, I'm happy. I'm happy to be back. It's exciting to be back. This is the fastest we've talked to each other back to back like this in a while. Taking me back to the old 30 and 30 days. It's good to be back. Coop Stone, my friends. How you guys doing?
Very busy, but I wanted to make sure we squeezed in some more here while we had the time. And I think this will be not as interesting as a conversation as we all probably hope, but we have to get through these names. That is, this is a name we have to get through. So we'll see how it goes.
You're really selling it. You're giving the radio show sell here. No, I got my Michigan State shirt on from home field. I'm so excited to talk about Jase Richardson. So ready whenever you guys are.
Yeah, I seem to be slightly wagging. But yeah, no, this will all be cut out of the podcast version of this. So this is YouTube exclusive content. But Jase Richardson, a very popular kind of draft Twitter guard. I feel like I've seen some uh, less than ethical takes on him here and there, some less than ethical means of delivering those takes as well. Even though we will not be calling out names, obviously. But Jase Richardson, listed at 6'3", 185 pounds. He kind of looks like he might be even sturdier than 185 pounds, but I don't think he actually is. I think it's just the face kind of fools you a little bit with him. He kind of has a skinnier, narrower, lower body. But he's an October 15th, 2005 birthday, so he's 19 years old. He'll turn 20 right before the start of his rookie season. So basically, not basically, he's like a whole year older, a year and a day older than Jeremiah Fears, I believe. And This season at Michigan State as a freshman, he averaged 12.1 points per game, 3.3 rebounds per game, 1.9 assists, zero point 0.8 steals, zero point 0.3 blocks on 49.3, 41.2, 83.6 shooting splits. I think it's pretty obvious to say that maybe the most intriguing number of his is that 41.2% from three. We'll give some added context there later. He only played 25.3 minutes per game, and he did not start every game for Michigan State. In fact, he spent most of the season coming off the bench, kind of earned a starting spot later in the year. But that does kind of carry over to show a lot, into a lot of his stats. He's a very high he's a high BPM guy. He was an obvious plus minus guy on that team. He was a high efficiency guy, but not a crazy high usage guy. Only a 19.4% usage rate for a 6'3" guy. But that 10.0 BPM I think moves a lot of people. 57.4 effective field goal rate, 62.4 true shooting, 3% offensive rebound rate, 11.4 defensive rebound rate, 14.4 assist rate, 9.9 turnover rate, 1.4 block rate, 1.9 steal rate, 41.8 free throw rate. He dunked 5 times. He shot 69% on close twos, 60 of 87. So not a crazy high volume there, but really efficient. 40.7% on long twos, of which he took 91. Took 122 free throws, shot 83.6% on those, and then 7.3 3-point attempts per 100 possessions, shooting 41.2%. And again, that's 114 total shots there. So despite the efficiency, not like a crazy bomber from three or anything, we're going to talk about kind of the differences there. Coop, I want to start with sort of who he was at Michigan State, and then we're going to transition that into how different that might look in the league. So, Coop, I'll throw this to you. What did Jase do so well this year at Michigan State that's really kind of got him onto the radar? Because I will say he didn't come into the year with like lottery hype. I wouldn't say. I think that's something that's kind of arose later. So you kind of what did he do to really earn that type of look?
the main thing is that he's just, I mean, obviously the sell is that he's efficient. The sell is that he's got, 62.4 true shooting. Doesn't matter the usage. Doesn't matter the type of usage even. He's knocking down a bunch of shots for a really good team as a really young guy. But I think the big thing with Jase is just that he's not, he played decently well without a ton of, on the ball usage. There were other guys grabbing offensive rebounds, and making kickouts to him for easy shots. He wasn't doing a ton of creation for himself without, off ball movement, that kind of thing. Just kind of a very simple, just kind of easy shots, easy looks, the kind of stuff that, Akins and all these other guys, these super athletes on Michigan State sort of allowed him to take. He was good at them. They needed, Michigan State's offense was disgusting, and they needed a guy who could just come in and hit some of the easy stuff that they would generate. And Jase was able to come in and do that. So I think that's kind of the big sell for him, is that he stepped up on a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Jase does is also just really, and we'll get more in depth in this, but it's just really conducive to modern day basketball for an off guard. And like Cooper sort of talked about, it's in multiple ways, it was sort of an ideal context of having a lot of crazy athletic teammates that were able to generate space and free Jase for a lot of open corner looks and just easy finishes. Good looks, and to Jase's credit, he capitalized on that at a high rate. With the percentages that you guys threw out there. Then he also, I think, got better as the season went on, and I think that as you get closer to the draft, and as you get better closer to the draft, I think that sort of elevates your stock, I would say. Also went up against zone way more than anybody else mentioned in the top 60, and I feel like that doesn't really get talked about too often, where 16.8% of his possessions were against the zone defense, and I feel like that he, not to say was wouldn't have done as well against man defense, but it certainly helps when you're going against zone that often and you're a really good shooter, as Jase is. So I feel like those components all made for Jase's stock to rise. And it is a really idealistic context. They have space generators. They have heavy movement in their offense with Izzo's movement offense and going up against a lot of zone. I think those three main factors really help to make this sort of the perfect storm for a really good Jase season. But, outside of that, there are elements to his game that are impressive that we'll get to.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I do think it's important to frame is that he really played like an off-wing role. He got to be a cog in an offensive machine. Now, Michigan State was not some crazy good offense or anything, but they ran some solid stuff, and their spacing was overall bad. And so Jase was kind of the guy who had to do a lot of the spacing. They were not a particularly good three-point shooting team, but they had good movement stuff. And listen, I think there is something to be said for Jase Richardson and his ability to just kind of execute that role. I think that's very admirable. I think he did a very good job in that. And he was, an efficient shooter in terms of, on 74 attempts off the dribble, he was in the 72nd percentile, 45.9 effective field goal rate. That's a good number. On 83 catch and shoot attempts, he was in the 95th percentile, 66.9 effective field goal rate. Really, really good, shooting numbers. Finishing wise, he was in the 89th percentile on 93 attempts with 68.8% effective field goal rate. Very efficient. What he did not do is run a ton of straight pick and roll. He did not, really play as a setup guard at all. And it's important to note that he is 6'2", 6'3". He is not if he is a shooting guard in the NBA, He's an undersized one. Now, let's not say there hasn't been successful undersized shooting guards. CJ McCollum, of course, maybe the most successful kind of recent example, but the Jazz have played two small guards for years now, right? And there's been more successful teams that aren't off the top of my head that have played two small guards and made that work. Even the Warriors right now, like Brandon Podziemski is like 6'4". If he's 2 guard size, it's kind of a technical thing. So I don't want to get too into the, hey, he has to be a point guard, he can't be a shooting guard, he's too small. Oh, the Cavs are the obvious one. The Cavs play, now Donovan Mitchell is just a different level of athlete as a 6'1" shooting guard. It's kind of you sort of gets into a different world when you consider, his standing reach, his vertical, all that type of stuff. But still, I do think it's important to keep in mind that he is, that Jase is, right now his game is more as an off guard. And I would say purely as an off guard. I mean, you look at some of the stats, the 14.4 assist rate, that's really low for a guy this size. In fact, as I kind of went through, some Bart stuff, and I was looking at, I did one query that came up with just way too many names that was like less than 50% assist rate, block rate, steal rate, included all those things. There's a lot of names. Listen, maybe the most successful you would say like Desmond Bain did that, not in his draft year, but he had done that. Sviatoslav Mikhailuk. But as I limited it by height. It becomes really interesting if you look at drafted players who are 6'5" or smaller, who have less than 20 or less than 15 assist rate. Even with everything else not really taken into account, it still is an interesting group in that there's just not a ton of track record of success for a lot of these guys, especially guys who did it in their draft year. So 6'5" players with less than 15, 6'5" or smaller players with an assist rate of less than 15 who were drafted. It's a lot of names of guys who Dante DiVincenzo is maybe the best analog here. Trey Mann did this in his freshman year. The truth is, not a lot of guys did it in their drafted year. Now, a lot of these guys weren't as efficient, but I do think that's worth noting. So I think this statistical profile is interesting. But let's start with kind of what he does well and how we think it might translate. And I think that starts with the off-ball game. So, Stone, how does he kind of go about getting his buckets as an off-ball player?
Yeah, I think it's primarily at a high percentage of being just a off-ball play finisher, especially as a shooter. I think that generally speaking, he's really got everything you look for in that sort of role down. I think he has good foot placement. I think he's got really quick at setting himself towards the rim. I don't think he's an overly impressive movement type shooter. I think he can hit those shots, but that's not really something I'm banking on with him. He shows flashes of it, but just not enough for me to latch onto as that being a big sell for him. Although I do think he moves without the ball very well. I think that he's and part of that is the offense that he was in under Izzo, but I think he is really good at consistently keeping his defender moving and tiring them out around the court. I think that a lot of those small things really play into aiding him as a guy within this sort of role in the NBA that can make that transition easy for him. Where I think Richardson would, I mean, just based on how he plays, a lot of how he plays, and if he were to generate minutes at an NBA level, I think he's going to have a pretty successful rookie season. Not that necessarily is indicative of future success, but I think that a lot of what he does is just very replicable and maybe replaceable. We'll get to that at the end. But I don't think the shooting or anything he did at Michigan State this season was real fluky at all. I really liked the cutting and the shooting, but apart from that, I think the the big like aspect of his game that keeps me intrigued, at least as him being for me a spoiler alert, but like a strong first round bet, at least in this year, would be that he is a really versatile finisher, and I think that he's really extends well around the rim and finishes through contact, not at a high rate, but at a reasonable rate where you feel confident that he's not going to be a liability around the rim. And I think that if you can score at those two levels alongside the mid range, which I would say is near top of the class, he's very comfortable shooting off of 1, 2, or 3 dribbles around the mid range or taking a floater around the free throw line. All those things sort of make him a 3-level scorer. I don't know to what degree, and we can get into that, especially I think more so my biggest questions would be around the rim, but there's not a lot of 3-level scorers so far that we've talked about, and I think Jase being that um, puts his value a bit higher in this class. So that's the main sell for me, is that he can score at all 3 levels. It's just to what degree, and we can get into the minutia of that.
I think a big part of the sell for a lot of people is that first Oregon game from back in February. I know some of the people I've talked to about Jase, and just their opinions of him are really formed by this game. 29 points on 3 for 6 from deep, 5 for 6 from the mid range, 1 of 1 at the rim, 8 for 9 from free throw. Really interesting game as a creator. I think Akins was out that game, and he had to step up, and he had to do a little more. Oregon is not, some bummy Big Ten team. Not incredible, nothing crazy, but they were decent, and he stepped up to the occasion, and he hit the shots. I think the hard thing for me is that there's 1 rim attempt and 0 assists there. And I think that's kind of my big problem. Not big problem, because I still like Jase, but as much as like this kind of stuff, he really does just profile as an off-ball wing. As much as you can ask him to step up and add a little bit more scoring, there's just not that much more to him, right? You can't ask him to do any kind of creation. And at that size, you have to add something more. There's not very many players who are, sub 6'4" in the NBA who can't run a pick and roll like at all, or cannot handle the ball in isolation, or cannot just like bring the ball up and get a team into their offense. And maybe he can do something like that, but we just have yet to see it. There's flashes here and there, but there's just nothing consistent. Jase was only asked to do things that he was really comfortable with. And that's not to say that he wasn't really good at them. He's really, like Stone was saying, good off-ball mover, just understands space, good cutter, great finisher. I think the fact that he can do those things really, really well, you can't bump him for that, right? I can't sit here and just be mad that he only got to do stuff he's good at, but it kind of stymies his star level outcomes, because I haven't seen him do the kind of stuff that you need a star level player to be able to do, right? So that's it. It's hard for me to see super, super high end outcomes if all you're going to do is hit these spot up shots and relocate, and not even at like a super star end level. He's just good. And for a young guy, good is it could be enough. It could show potential in that area, and he could grow and develop and get to that star level off ball shot making. But that's a really high end outcome to hit if that's all you're going to bring offensively. So,
yeah, I think this is a really interesting, like, philosophical debate, to be honest. Would you rather bet on someone who did a lot of things, but maybe wasn't great at all of them? I think an interesting guy to compare Jase to is like a Liam McNeely, who I know you guys didn't like, but McNeely had to do a lot of things this year. He had to play with the ball a lot. He had to run a good amount of pick and roll. He was maybe in a role that was uncomfortable for him, and he wasn't very good. He wasn't very efficient. Like, just a fact, like, Michigan State was a much better team than UConn this year. And at least a part of that was because Jase was just a more efficient player than McNeely was. Would you rather bet on that kind of guy who I think, was a higher RSCI talent, but probably a similar like caliber of player coming out of high school? Even if McNeely had a little bit more pub, like going back and watching what I could on Jase, like probably similar enough, like kind of high school guys. Would you rather bet on a guy like that, or would you rather bet on a guy like Jase who was elite in his role, but his role was limited and he wasn't asked to do a ton extra, and he there's a question as to he's kind of a mystery box in that way. Well, what does we haven't seen him do these more things and be bad at it. So maybe he's good at it. But there's also that part of me that's like, I don't watch Family Guy, but I've seen the meme of, would you rather get a boat or would you rather get a present? And that present could be a boat, but it's a mystery. And I think there's some of that with Jase where it's like, I think, there are people who like Jase more than, some guys who I'm really high on. We'll talk about Neat Clifford down the line. Neat Clifford is a guy I've already watched. I'm crazy high on, and we'll talk about that. And I think there's a little bit of, but he could be, Neat Clifford if he had the ball more, right? Sure, but even though Neat is older, I'd rather just take the guy that I know is Neat Clifford, or whatever. So, I do think that there's kind of an interesting philosophical debate there. And with Jase, I do think you really have to focus on a lot of the little things. In terms of his off the dribble shooting, I think he's a really good off the dribble shooter, like statistically, and he's a good off the dribble shooter in terms of when he can attack a tilted floor and hard rip and one dribble pull up, it looks good. But he's a bad space creator. He's rarely creating off the dribble jumpers against like a one-on-one matchup, and when he does, it looks bad. There were multiple reps in the Big Ten this year where he was trying to create one-on-one, and he just couldn't create enough space to get off the dribble jumper off. He is good at attacking closeouts, but he's good at attacking closeouts in his way. He doesn't go tight to bodies and get contact and blow by him. Like even though he looks kind of sturdier and stronger, he doesn't drive like that. He finishes like that, and the finishing is great. I think he's the guy who he could have a sort of special skill in terms of he's great at once he's in the lane, he gets bumps and finishes through contact or gets fouls as good as anyone in this class. But he doesn't drive. He drives super wide. He doesn't take good angles as a driver because he kind of wants his little one dribble pull up, or he doesn't want to be in a situation where if he does get bumped off, he might lose the ball. He plays very safe. At Michigan State, he was very safe. He didn't want to. He made basically no risky passes. If you go and watch all his turnovers, and he didn't turn the ball over much to his credit in some ways, but if you watch all his turnovers, none of them are him trying to like fit a pass in a tight window. It's all him either getting stripped or there was a shot clock violation in there. There were a couple other like turnovers that are just like they're not bad turnovers. I'm not saying he's like some awful ball handler, but he's not a high level advantage creator. He is sort of a guy who needs to be put in situations as kind of an off-ball attacker and reader of tilted floors, which I do think he's good at. But he's also part of the reason the assist rate was low is because he was also just like fine settling. He is a settler in some ways, I think, including a settler for passes that are non-advantages. If he takes his one dribble hard going wide to his left and help comes over, he's not trying to stop and hesitate and see, okay, does he go back to that guy? Can I get another gap? He'll just stop and throw the pass there, even if it's not for a shot, right? Which is, again, fine. It keeps the ball moving, but it doesn't, to me, nothing he does really scream star upside other than the finishing. But even the finishing, again, he only had 93 attempts at the rim. Like, to me, that is a problem. Like, that's not enough for a guy who is, and he dunked 5 times, and only one of them looked particularly athletic. And I don't necessarily see star there. I think he can be a really solid offensive player, but he's also 6'2". It's like when I was trying to kind of fish around in my head and talking to some smart people and trying to figure out, okay, like, well, what does it look like for him in the NBA? I think something that popped up to me is like what Mike Conley is now, where he's like first and foremost a spacer who is a good off-ball mover and a smart second side attacker and can run some pick and roll. Like I think in time Jase will be able to run some pick and roll fine, especially if you have to go over. He's not quite yet good at like punishing unders. He doesn't just step into shots and bomb from deep. He's very much a rhythm shooter. And if he doesn't have that rhythm, he just won't take the shot. He won't force up bad ones. Like that's the difference between him and Fears. Fears is a rhythm shooter, but he'll take some off rhythm. So every once in a while, he'll hit one off rhythm. Jace just won't. If he's not in rhythm, he won't take it. He won't even think about it unless the clock is winding down. He won't take off rhythm shots. So he really has to kind of figure out some of that footwork and stuff to beat unders. But I think he'll be able to run some pick and roll in time and make simple reads. And he's going to be a good enough finisher. I think that he requires some help at the rim, but he hasn't shown any type of high level processing to me in terms of reading the defense at a super high level. So maybe it's more of like a Max Strus, but we're going to talk about this. Max Strus and Mike Conley and other guys you could bring up with Jase, I think provide more defensive value. So I'm sure you guys might have more to say on the offense, but let's kind of save that for as we get to his overall value, because I think that's a great place to go with Jase eventually. What do you guys feel about the defense here? Because I do think maybe that's where I'm the most against some of what I've seen. Like I've seen some people talk about him like he is a particularly good defender, and I'm just not sure I'm there. So I want to get your guys' opinion on it first.
I think he's a one position defender, and I think he's really good at containing opposing guards for the most part. And that has a lot less value than you might think when you can only guard one position successfully. Being a Lakers fan and having watched him all season and watching Gabe Vincent is really good at defending opposing guards. He's really good at it. Gabe Vincent can't be on the floor in certain situations because he can only defend opposing guards. And it's really difficult to succeed in that way. And that's your high level shot maker, which we'll get back to the offense. But, I think that could exist for Richardson. But defensively, I think he, on the ball, he tries. He is competitive. But he's only successful doing so against opposing guards. If he's switched on to wings, obviously bigs, but any sort of guard bigger than 6'4" or particularly strong or particularly bursty, I think Jase is going to have some issues. He's best off probably defending a lot of backup guards in the NBA. Is where I would assume he'd be most successful, and I think a lot of players outside of that position or role would give him issues. Off the ball, I think that I don't know if I'm alone in this, but I thought he had a lot of trouble as a decision maker in help defense, where he picked a lot of the wrong places to be on the court as a help defender. I think that he got caught in no man's land quite a bit. I think that he tried to overextend himself at times. It just felt like he was never quite comfortable with where he was on the court when he was in help situations. And I think a lot of times he would try and do too much, and it might sound weird, but in turn that resulted in him not really doing much of anything by trying to do too much. And I think that he's got pretty much no chance of being any sort of recovery defender. He's just not quick enough or long enough to really be effective in that. And he also late, like if someone gets past him, it's almost like the switch clicks a little bit late for him, like half a second, and he realizes, oh, I got to somehow get myself back in this play. But by then it's the offensive player is too far away from him, and he's not quick enough or long enough to get back into it. Plus the processing. So yeah, I think it can be fine or solid against opposing guards, but it's for the most part going to be backup guards, and I think that really stifles a lot of what he does defensively.
I do also worry that he's just kind of a bit too bulky, and he's not like playing super tight to guys, so his screen nav isn't the best. And if you are going to be guarding smaller guards only, you're going to have to defend some pick and rolls. I don't think he's like awful. I don't think his screen nav is like bad, but it's not like a huge plus for him to the point where you can trust him as just a primary point of attack guy, right? So you're looking at a pretty limited positional defender, doesn't do much of anything in help because both his block and steal rate are down below 2, which, I mean, even for the scheme, I think that's kind of the thing that I've seen thrown around is like, oh, you know, plays in the, you know, slightly more conservative, you know, defensive scheme or whatever.
I will say too that Richardson is just not much of a playmaker. He doesn't have quick hands. He's not really gambling much. As sort of a Bryce said, he's sort of safe defensively. He's not trying to make a lot of plays, and that's fine. He can contain opposing guards, but he's not really creating any offense out of the defense either at times, which goes to, you know, the low defensive steal and block rates.
And nobody on Michigan State really does put up insane stock numbers, but it's just I think that, Stone, you talking about his sort of decision-making paralysis is a really interesting way to look at that. He's just not athletic enough to not be a few steps ahead as a helper and a decision maker. And, you know, this is the kind of stuff he could grow at, still relatively young. Maybe he gets better at screen nav, puts in a little bit more effort to fight over. I mean, the Big Ten is not a particularly hard screening league.
Here's my pushback with a lot of what everyone is talking about with Jase is that I think he doesn't exert his will at all defensively. Like, for who he should be a stronger guard who is willing and able to chest guys up, but he's not. I don't want to say, like, I hate the term soft. I do. I hate the term soft. But he's very conservative in how he guards on the ball. He is not someone who's willing to exert his will. I think he's really conservative in his overall decision-making defensively. And you just, like, there's something to be said for being a conservative decision-maker as a guard. But if you look at all the best guard decision-makers, they are willing to, guard defenders, excuse me, they are willing to make a mistake sometimes if it means that they are more consistently actually affecting what's going on. You look at Drew Holiday, you look at Andrew Nemhard, who I think is maybe a potentially worthwhile physical comp for Michigan State, or for Jase Richardson. Andrew Nemhard is constantly making decisions and trying to exert his will on a game defensively in a way Jase just isn't. And I'd have to go back and watch and see if Nemhard was like that in his freshman year at Florida. But by the time he was done at Gonzaga, he absolutely was. And that was something I missed on. And that I actually thought his defensive decision-making was kind of frustrating because he was just kind of flying around everywhere. But now I've sort of changed my evaluation. I want my guards to fly around and try things. And at the college level, they're going to make more mistakes than not, probably. But as they get older in the NBA, that confidence to me is more important. The worst thing Jase Richardson could be as a guard defender, other than actively bad, is someone who is fine at guarding guards in isolation, but bad at, like, everything else. If that's the case, then he's Davion Mitchell, who is the most overrated defensive player in the NBA. Because Davion Mitchell is great at guarding guards one-on-one, but no one tries to ISO on him. They just set a screen. And then he's not a good screen nav guy, and he's behind him, and he's a bad recovery defender. You have to be something else in the NBA as a guard. It's like I think one of the biggest misconceptions oftentimes about what NBA defense is that your one-on-one defense is like a huge factor. It's a part of things, especially guarding up a little bit, which I'm not sure Jase can do. He just doesn't play strong. Like, guys go through his chest way easier than I would like. Again, he can contain fine, but if guys get a half an advantage on him, he can't get back in front. And he doesn't play crazy hard either. Like, it's not like the motor is running nonstop defensively. Offensively, I think he plays pretty hard. He's running around. He even sets screens and everything. But for a guy of this archetype, I want him to be a really confident, alert, and impactful defender. And I just don't think Jase is. So I'm just kind of left, as I transition overall value, and you guys, if you have spare notes, please get them out as we're talking about overall value. I didn't mean to move this along too fast, but as I'm thinking about my overall value with Jase, I actually think I'm gonna move him down based on this discussion, because I do think there is a potentially cool score in here as someone who is a part of like a motion offense, who is good at second side attacking and is an efficient shooter and is a really good finisher. There's value there, and I've missed on guys like this before. Like, I think the sell here is similar to what the sell on like Jared McCain was, but I think McCain was a far better shooter and a more impactful driver who took better angles and was willing to do things. So I like Jase. I would definitely draft him. He's a pretty borderline kind of first, second rounder for me, but I worry that the defense is bad, and I don't think he does enough to overcome much of that. So he's going to be a late first rounder for me. You have him in the tier with Newell and Murray Boyles, it's a tier ahead of Malawak and McNeely, but I'm just not all the way. I'm just not all the way there with Jase the way I wish I was. As much as I like the efficiency, and I don't want to take too much from missing on a guy like McCain the way I did, because I don't think there's a crazy precedent for guys like him, and also he did only play like 10 games this year on a really shitty basketball team. So as much as like that was a pretty bad swing and a miss for me, it's also like I'm wary of, I never give myself victory laps after a rookie season. So I don't want to give myself, too bad of a flogging after one season too. So I think Jase is fine. I think he's a potentially good player, but I don't think he's ever going to do anything I particularly value as winning. And if I am going to take bets on guys like this, I'd rather them have one more kind of real standout skill. Stone, where are you at with Jase?
Sorry, I froze there for a minute, but I do have some more notes on Jase that I'll try and get out before we close up. I think we didn't really spend too much time on the handle. I think the handle for Jase is actually really tight. I think that he's not explosive out of it, which limits what he can do as a finisher, right? Because he can't explode towards the rim, and he's not explosive around the rim either, although he is versatile and extends really well. So that mitigates some of that. So if he's assisted around the rim, I think he can be a really good finisher. He's just not getting a lot of self-created good looks for himself. But the handle's tight enough to where, and it's not overly complex, but it's not like it's a very basic handle. He's not just doing one crossover. He can put together a couple moves, and I think it's enough for as good of a shooter as he is to get himself good looks as a step back guy or some side shots around the mid range or in the or from behind the arc, to be able to create and generate some open looks. Even though he's not much of a advantage creator, I think he's a good enough shooter that the windows, even though they're not super large, are big enough for him to capitalize out of, to make those shots at a pretty good and efficient clip. The other thing I would say too is the first step, I think, is lackluster. Like I said, he's not explosive, but even against tilted defenses, he takes such rounded angles, but also the first step is just not that good. And those two things together make him to be a underwhelming driver, I would say. And I think that it takes away from me thinking he can be some sort of secondary creator a lot, because he's also just not a very proactive processor. We talked about it with Fears yesterday, but I think even more so it stands out for me with Jase at least in this role of an off guard, where he's not really making passes until he's at the place where he wants to make the pass out of, or he's not reading the court until he's at the place where he decides he needs to read the court out of necessity. There's a lot of times where he's driving and because he takes those rounded angles, and because he has a lackluster first step, he gets stymied and stopped in the mid range, and he's not long enough to really shoot over guys. If he gets stuck, and once he's stuck, he's waiting for someone to cut. He's looking around. He doesn't have like a secondary plan B in place to figure out what he wants to do once he's in that sort of scenario. And it happened more often than you would like. At least I would like from watching his film. So it felt like he's very underwhelming in a role where he's tasked with being a secondary creator. But as we talked about with the shooting, I think he's a good cutter. I think he's a good assisted rim finisher. All those things make for a really enticing off guard, just not in a way that you can also add some secondary creation within your offense out of him. So that's pretty much all I had with him. And as far as where I value him, I'm playing around with the numerical things, the numerical values a little bit, but he's certainly in my tier 3, somewhere in there in the latter half, I think, somewhere between 9 and 12. And I'm playing around with that sort of order with him and Newell, Queen, and Malawat. But those are all guys that are in that sort of range for me, and I think I'm comfortable with Richardson in there as well.
Man, the more we talk, the more I just drop on Jase, because it's really hard. It just the role he is going to come in and play is kind of not fetishized, but very like overly indexed for. It's like it kind of reminds me of like people's obsession with like short roll passing from a big. Like, yes, it's important, and yes, it's cool, and it's a cool surrounding skill, but you can't make a prospect out of just short roll passing, right? You have to add other stuff, and you have to do other stuff in a game. And I feel like that's just Jase for me. Like, he's ideally this basically an off-ball one, I feel like, for next to a super creator, next to a Luka, next to a Braun, next to a Paolo. But he has to be schemed for so heavily that I feel like that loses a lot of its value, right? Like, if you're not just that kind of level of guy who can either do a lot more with the ball in your hands and be a secondary for that guy and make his life easier, or you're not going to be an off-ball like gravity well. I just don't know what your real value is, especially if you don't bring a ton of value defensively. So I'm really struggling with him as like, is this guy a second rounder, a late first rounder? As Stone, what do you think here?
Yeah, I mean that tier for me, I struggle with that tier because there's so many guys in that tier for me in this class that I was going to label them as like fringe lotto guys, but there's so many of them that there's never that many fringe lotto guys to where I'm saying maybe just like first round caliber talent is sort of where I lie. Where I think I'd take Jase first round in pretty much every class. And obviously the deeper the draft, the later I'd take him. But in some classes that could be at like this class, maybe 9 or 10, and in other classes maybe that's somewhere in the 20s. But I think I feel confident that he's a first round bet for me. And in terms of the value, there's a good 7-inch difference between them, so it's kind of hard to compare. But just in terms of role, like I think we kind of are seeing the ups and downs of this player with Michael Porter Jr., a guy who is a good shooter, can finish a decent amount. He's a much better rebounder, obviously, because of his size and frame. But we're seeing what happens with those guys who can't do much else out of that. And if they are having nights where they struggle to make shots, he's also playing, with the best facilitator in the league. And if you can't make shots, he becomes very quickly not very valuable to the Nuggets, to the point they're playing Westbrook over him in a lot of situations in these playoffs. And the nights where he is on, he is really valuable for that team as a floor spacer and a play finisher. And not to say, like I said, there's a big difference between who they are as players just simply because of the height. But in that sort of role, I think we see the variance on a night-to-night basis.
Michael Porter Jr. has value because he's just gonna shoot the piss out of the ball. Like that thing is like and he just has that level of confidence that you need to have as a shooter. That Dion Waiters irrational, I'd rather go 0 for 30 than 0 for 9. And I just don't think Jase has that. I mean, Bryce kind of touched on that. I think it's really hard because a big differentiator for me between a first rounder and a second rounder is how many kinds of schemes can you play in, whether that's on offense, whether that's on defense. There's a lot of offenses in the NBA that Jase just isn't going to add much value to, right? Because he can't do any dribbling. He can't do any creating. He's not going to do any playmaking really with the ball. So he has to have like a schemed motion offense or the kind of offense where they let a mega creator just draw a ton of, where you have your Paolo driving in and they just need somebody who can hit a semi-open shot. And I think for a team like the Magic, Jase could be really valuable because they don't need a ton of defense on top of what they already have. But I don't know. He's just not enough of a gravity well or enough of a nuclear shooter for me to really be sold in that way. So I think he'll end up being at the top of my second round tier, maybe at the bottom of my first round tier, because he is just young and he is just productive and he played a role. But for me, my role players, I want to see them scaled down from what they did in college. It's really hard to come in and do the exact same stuff you did in college at the NBA level. And I don't really think there's a world where Jase adds value as like a 15 usage. Well, I guess I just come in and kind of do a little bit of stuff kind of guy. So I don't know. I'm really skeptical, and I'm going to have to play around with his tier. But I don't know. I'm unsure.
All very fair points on the very enigmatic Jase Richardson. Maybe we're finding out that we all just hate short people. That's our issue.
Thank you so much for listening to the Upside Swings NBA Draft Podcast here on YouTube. If you want to check out more of our stuff, you can follow us on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. You can check out our website, upsideswings.com. You can follow all of us on Twitter, subscribe here on YouTube for more content coming down the line. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts on this pod and, our process in the comments. We'll see you next time. Thank you. I think you said earlier he's a year older than Fears. Then somebody has it wrong, actually. I thought, because my trusty Tankathon says they're the same age. So
that's interesting. So according to Real GM, Fears
let's
is
figure this out.
October 14th, 2006, and Richardson is October 15th, 2005. So that would make them a whole year apart, which I do think potentially matters in the evaluation.
Yeah, Richardson's 05. Jeremiah Fears. Yeah, is 06. Okay, you're right. I'm wrong. I'm going to sue Tankathon for making me... Actually, I can just edit around this to make myself not look like an idiot.
You can say I will do the same thing on the podcast.
So, I'm the biggest dickhole ever. God, Stone, fuck you, dude. He's...
And there's another point I was going to make that was, he, as you can tell, this is a high level pod today. Give
me 1 second. I need to pull up and see if anybody else's numbers are suppressed by this. This is getting edited out. I should have thought of this before.